A Las Vegas celebrity known affectionately as the Old Man on the television show Pawn Stars. Today, 77-year-old Richard Harrison was laid to rest.
No one expected anything unusual, but when they opened the old man's garage after he died, everything changed, and people couldn't believe their eyes. It looked normal at first, but then they found something that didn't make sense, and the whole place suddenly felt different. So what was he hiding all those years? And why did no one notice it before?
Affectionately known though as the Old Man on the hit show Pawn Stars. His passing announced on Monday, and for most this goodbye looms heavy.
And how did one simple discovery turn into something so shocking? Join us as we go step by step, connect the clues, and reveal the surprising truth that has everyone talking. The secret stash nobody was supposed to find. The cleanup allegedly started right after Richard died in June 2018. The family probably expected to find old clothes and dust, but the storage lockers reportedly held a massive secret. Hidden under a pile of junk was a huge stash of rare coins and gold. These pieces allegedly went through the pawn shop, but never made it to the shelves. Nobody on the show ever talked about it. The fans had no clue. It stayed hidden and off the books, which was clearly the plan. Richard allegedly kept the real treasures for himself. The stash was never reported to anyone. It was clearly supposed to stay buried forever. People in the inner circle claim the haul was worth hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions. This guy spent 3 decades on television telling everyone else exactly what their stuff was worth. Now, it looks like he was just keeping the best prizes for himself the whole time. It turns every deal he ever made on camera into a total lie. The old man was playing a secret game while everyone else just followed the script. The timing of this find is what really makes it interesting. Richard updated his will just a year before he died. He cut Christopher out of the picture and locked down every single asset. If this secret stash exists, it proves he spent his final months planning exactly how to control everything from the grave. He turned $5,000 into a massive empire. Right up until his last breath, he made sure nobody got a penny unless he decided they deserved it. Was the gold and silver pawn shop the whole business, or just the part he wanted the world to see? How the gold and silver were born. Richard and Rick started small. When they arrived in Las Vegas in 1981, they opened a tiny coin and gold shop at 1501 Las Vegas Boulevard. 300 square feet of space and not much else. It was not glamorous. It was barely a business. But Richard had the instincts of a natural trader and the relentlessness of someone who had already hit rock bottom and had no intention of going back. He worked the shop every day. He understood value. He knew how to buy low and negotiate hard, and he passed every one of those skills on to his son. The two of them made a good team. Rick had the energy and the charm. Richard had the experience and the authority. Together they developed what Rick later described as a good cop, bad cop routine. Rick would draw sellers in with warmth and humor, and then Richard would crush the price down to what it was actually worth. It worked. The business grew. They relocated twice, eventually landing the pawn license they had been chasing for years after a Las Vegas city law limited the number of pawn shops based on population. Richard had reportedly been calling the city's statistician regularly, waiting for the population to hit the threshold that would allow a new license. In 1989, it did. The gold and silver pawn shop officially opened its doors. Before the cameras showed up and turned everything into a spectacle, Richard and Rick spent 20 years building a massive business. By 2005, reports showed they were loaning out about $3 million a year. They were pulling in around $700,000 just from interest. The shop became famous for having the weird stuff that actually mattered, like Civil War gear, rare coins, and sports items. People who actually knew what they were doing went there. It was not just some random pawn shop. It was a local powerhouse. Then, in 2008, a production company called Left Field Pictures approached Rick with an idea. They wanted to make a reality show about the pawn shop. Rick had actually spent years trying to get a show made himself, ever since the shop had been featured on a late-night cable program in 2003. Now, someone was finally offering to make it happen. The show was pitched to the History Channel. A format was agreed upon, and in July 2009, Pawn Stars debuted. Within 10 weeks, it was the highest-rated program on the entire History Channel network. Nobody had expected a show about a pawn shop in Las Vegas to become a cultural phenomenon, but nobody had expected Richard Harrison either, and he had a habit of exceeding expectations. The old man America fell in love with. Richard did not set out to be a television star. He set out to run a pawn shop. But when the cameras arrived, something remarkable happened. The real Richard, gruff, funny, brutally honest, deeply proud of his family, turned out to be exactly what television needed. He did not perform for the camera. He barely acknowledged it. He just sat in his chair and was himself, and millions of people found that completely irresistible. He earned his nickname, the Old Man, at the age of 38, which says a great deal about how Richard had always carried himself. Even when he was relatively young, he had the bearing of someone who had already lived 3 lifetimes and was not particularly impressed by yours. On camera, that quality made for some of the show's best moments. He had a gift for making buyers feel foolish without ever raising his voice, and for delivering a punchline so dry it took a second for the audience to realize they were laughing. But behind the deadpan exterior was something that the show only hinted at occasionally. A man who genuinely cared about history, about the items that passed through his hands, and about the family he had built from almost nothing. He donated to local causes. He attended civic events. In 2012, when the city of Lexington, North Carolina, his hometown, declared an official Richard Harrison Day and gave him the key to the city, reportedly, he was visibly moved. That was not the grumpy old man from the show. That was a man who had come from very little and had not forgotten where he started. At its peak, the gold and silver pawn shop was reportedly drawing between 3,000 and 5,000 visitors per day. People did not come to pawn things anymore. They came to see where the show was filmed, to meet the cast, and to be photographed in the spot where deals had been made on television. Richard had inadvertently turned a 300-square-foot coin shop into one of the most visited locations in Las Vegas. The old man had become a brand, and like all brands, there were things happening behind it that the public was not meant to see. But while Richard was becoming an American icon on screen, something was quietly happening to his health, and he was determined to make sure almost nobody knew about it. The battle he fought off camera. Richard Harrison had been dealing with Parkinson's disease for several years before his death in 2018. The exact timeline of his diagnosis has never been publicly confirmed by the family, but the effects of the illness were reportedly visible to those close to him long before the general public became aware of what was happening. Parkinson's is a progressive neurological condition that affects movement and coordination, and for a man whose public identity was built on stillness, authority, and control, it was a cruelly fitting adversary. Richard retired from Pawn Stars in 2017, a year before he died. The official narrative at the time was that he was stepping back to spend more time with his family, and that his health was declining. What fans who had watched him for years had already noticed was that his appearances on the show had become less frequent in the final seasons. He seemed frailer. The sharp energy that had powered all those years of deadpan deal-making was quieter. The old man was slowing down, and the show was slowly adjusting around that reality without making a fuss about it. His son Rick announced Richard's death on Instagram on June 25, 2018. The post was simple and direct, which was fitting because that was exactly how Richard had always operated. Rick wrote that the old man had lost his long battle with Parkinson's and asked for the family's privacy. The Gold and Silver Pawn Shop posted its own statement, describing Richard as the heart of Pawn Stars and the best father and grandfather a family could have. Tributes came in from across the entertainment world, from the History Channel, from the show's producers, and from millions of fans who had spent years watching a man they felt they knew. What made the tributes particularly poignant was the way so many of them used the same word, real. People kept saying that Richard had felt real to them. Not a character, not a performance, but an actual person. The kind of gruff, weathered, quietly funny man that television rarely produces and never manufactures. The old man had been, by most accounts, exactly what he appeared to be, which made what came next so much harder to reconcile. Because within days of his death, a document became public that suggested the man everyone had called real had been carrying a secret about his own family that nobody on television had ever mentioned. Not once in 9 seasons. The will that shocked the world. Within weeks of Richard's death, the legal publication platform The Blast obtained and published his last will and testament. What it contained stopped fans cold. Richard had 3 sons, Rick, Joseph, and Christopher. Most viewers of Pawn Stars had never heard of Christopher because he had never appeared on the show and was never mentioned in any meaningful way during its run. But he existed. He was Richard's youngest son, and Richard had made a very deliberate decision about what to do with him. In 2017, just 1 year before his death, Richard updated his will and explicitly removed Christopher as a beneficiary. The first will actually included all 3 sons, but the new version changed everything. What really sticks out is the specific way Richard wrote Christopher out. He didn't just forget him. He went out of his way to mention him by name just to say he was getting nothing. The document said he had love and affection for Christopher, but then followed it up by intentionally leaving him out on purpose. He even added the phrase, "and his issue," which is just a fancy legal way of saying Christopher's kids were banned from the money too. No reason was given in the document. No explanation was offered by the family, beyond Rick's brief statement that it was a private matter that the family had previously discussed. Corey, Richard's grandson and a regular on Pawn Stars, told reporters he had not seen his uncle Christopher in 20 years, since Corey was in junior high school. Christopher had not been part of the shop, had not been part of the show, and had apparently not been part of the family's daily life for a very long time. But the public silence around his existence had been so complete that most fans did not even know he was there. Legal experts who reviewed the will noted that Richard had executed the disinheritance correctly from a legal standpoint. By naming Christopher explicitly and stating that the exclusion was intentional and made with full knowledge, Richard had protected the document from any challenge based on the argument that he had simply forgotten or overlooked his youngest son. This was not an oversight. This was a decision, a considered, deliberate, legally airtight decision made by a dying man in the final year of his life. The estate itself was estimated to be worth approximately $5 million, according to reports. The mystery of why Richard cut Christopher out of his will has never been solved, and what allegedly happened inside the Harrison family in the years before his death may be even more complicated than the will itself suggests. The family fractures nobody saw coming. The disinheritance of Christopher was the most public crack in the Harrison family story, but it was not the only one. In the years following Richard's death, the family that had seemed so united on screen began to show the kind of strains that tend to appear when cameras stop rolling and estates start to be settled. What had looked from the outside like a tight-knit, loud, lovably dysfunctional family turned out to have some deep and very private divisions running underneath the surface. In 2022, Richard's widow Joanne filed a lawsuit against her own son Rick. The lawsuit reportedly concerned ownership of the gold and silver pawn shop and related family assets. The details of the legal dispute were not made fully public, and the matter was reportedly resolved privately. But the fact that it happened at all was a significant moment. Joanne was the woman Richard had reportedly fought to support across 20 years in the Navy. She was the person he had moved to Las Vegas with $5,000 and a plan. For the family to reach the point of a legal dispute between mother and son, in court, on the record, spoke to tensions that went well beyond any ordinary family disagreement. Things took a dark turn in January 2024 when Rick's son Adam died at 39. The cause was an accidental overdose of fentanyl and meth. Adam put in some time at the pawn shop back in the day, but eventually traded the cameras for a career as a plumber. He stayed out of the spotlight so much that most fans had no clue he even existed until the news broke. Rick went public with the cause of death to blast the fentanyl crisis, calling it a disaster that nobody is taking seriously enough. Adam left behind a son named Colton, and the family started an education fund for the kid. Shortly after Adam's death, Corey announced that he would be leaving Pawn Stars after its 23rd season. He told the Las Vegas Review that he and his castmates had all been playing characters and that it was time to move on and prepare for his future. The show went on indefinite hiatus when its History Channel contract ended. The institution that Richard had built, the shop, the show, the brand, had effectively come apart within 6 years of his death. What he had held together, it seemed, had been held together partly by him. The Harrison family had been one of America's best-loved television families for 15 years, but behind the counter of the gold and silver, a very different story had been unfolding. And Richard had allegedly known how much of it was true. What the old man left behind. When people talk about what Richard Harrison left behind, they usually start with the shop. The gold and silver pawn shop is still open on Las Vegas Boulevard. It still draws tourists. It still operates as the functioning business that Richard and Rick built from 300 square feet and a handshake in 1981. Whatever has happened to the family since Richard's death, the shop itself remains. A physical legacy that has outlasted the television show, outlasted the family unity it once represented, and outlasted the old man himself. But Richard left behind something harder to measure than a building on Las Vegas Boulevard. He left behind a model of a certain kind of American life. The kind where you start with nothing, survive on hustle and nerve, build something real with your hands and your instincts, and end up somewhere you could not have imagined when you started. Richard had been a car thief at 17 and a petty criminal on his way to prison. By the end of his life, he had been given the key to his hometown, been nominated for the Time 100, and been watched by millions of people every week on one of the most popular shows on cable television. That arc, by any measure, is remarkable. The Parkinson's diagnosis, the retirement, the final years spent updating his will and making his decisions. All of that paints a picture of a man who knew he was running out of time and was determined to leave things exactly as he wanted them. The disinheritance of Christopher was not an accident. It was a closing statement. Richard had expressed love and exclusion in the same sentence, and had made sure there was nothing anyone could do about it legally. What fans are left with is a version of Richard Harrison that is more complex and more interesting than the one the show delivered. The old man was not just a grumpy grandfather with a fedora and a gift for one-liners. He was a man who had climbed out of poverty through sheer will, built an empire from a coin shop, raised a family while deployed for half of their childhood, and then, in the final act, made choices about that family that nobody outside it has ever fully understood. Do you think Richard Harrison's legacy reflects the American dream? And what do you think about Richard's decision to exclude Christopher from his will in the context of his life story? Share your thoughts with us in the comment section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.